Happy New Year. How are you guys doing?
We're good. We're good. And if you are a Kings and Niners fan, you're doing pretty good as well. So you're sitting there. You were in Memphis, right, for the road trip. You were in Atlanta as well. So you're
Yep.
hanging out. I don't know if you're in your hotel room, whatever it is, and the news drops that Chris Duarte will be inserted into the starting lineup. What were your initial thoughts?
Well, it was funny. So I was in the locker room pregame, and Mike Brown a few minutes earlier had hinted that there might be changes to the starting lineup, specifically regarding Kevin Herter. And Chris Duarte just has a basketball and is like dribbling around, like you do the thing when you're like in seventh grade and you're dribbling around and you're doing layups off the
Yeah.
wall, and like everyone's kind of clowning him. And at that point, it was pretty clear that Duarte was going to be the starter.
Mm-hmm.
And he was just kind of bouncing off the walls, so it was funny to see. But I think it makes some sense, right? Like, whether it's Kevin Herter's finger injury or just his overall lack of offensive production, I think the Kings needed something, and I think it made sense in particular against Memphis because Chris Duarte does give you a better option in terms of defending John Morant, right? And he ended up doing a pretty good job when he was on him. So I think perimeter defense, it makes some sense. It allows you to have Duarte defend point guards, take a little bit of the onus off of De'Aaron Fox and Keegan Murray. And while Duarte doesn't really provide a whole lot offensively, I think he's shooting just north of 30% from three right now. He does offer an upgrade defensively, and they have enough scoring punch elsewhere that it makes sense. So I'm assuming, based on the way that Sunday night's game went in Memphis, that it's going to be something Mike Brown sticks with for the time being, and maybe it's something that kickstarts Kevin Herter and gets him back going. But I think that's certainly a spot to watch going forward, given that whether it's Kevin Herter or Harrison Barnes, the Kings need more production from those guys, and maybe this is the first indication that more changes are coming.
Chris, we just played in the last segment you asking Malik about just kind of what changed between the Portland game and then Atlanta at halftime, and Malik gave an answer kind of hinting at a little bit more of a players-led halftime session. I don't know if we'd go as far as calling it a players-only meeting or anything as serious as that, but just kind of what was your read on what happened at halftime in that Atlanta game, and do you actually feel like there was something there that happened and then you see them just kind of take the reins against Memphis? Do you think that was maybe a moment for this team?
Yeah, maybe. It seems like Mike Brown sort of downplayed, like, oh, it was one of 82. We didn't
Right.
we didn't want to overreact. But like De'Aaron Fox after the game said, in Atlanta, they really needed that win. That was like they needed that comeback to avoid that road trip, potentially going south. You don't want to get blown out on the road. And they were down 31, I think, 31-8 early in the first quarter in
Mm-hmm.
Atlanta. And what Malik said that was interesting to me when talking about the defense that they play, he said it was just laziness. Like, when they're not playing good defense, it's just laziness, which is kind of confounding because this is a team that has to be better defensively if it wants to
Mm-hmm.
accomplish its goals in the playoffs. And we've seen them play relatively good defense against the Warriors in the playoffs last year. So it's really just an effort thing. And one of the questions I would have, Mike Brown, obviously a good coach and knows what he's doing, but the Kings practice a lot and they practice pretty hard. And when you talk about them maybe lacking energy or lacking physicality on the defensive end, I wonder how much is you can just trace back to their energy levels in terms of how much they practice. And I also think that might play into their performances on back-to-backs, obviously, right? Like, not to say that they don't need the practice, but that, I think there might be something to the point where, maybe you ease up off the gas pedal a little bit now that the team is a little bit more familiar with Mike Brown's system in terms of the practice time. And this is a team that, like, when they go on road trips, they get off the plane and a lot of times they go immediately to the gym and practice. It's not like get off the plane, go to the hotel. It's like get off the plane and then go get a run in, go get some shots in, and prepare for the game the next day that way. So that can be a good way to acclimate your body. I'm sure that's what the Kings would argue. But it can also be potentially a reason why this team might be lethargic at times or might lack energy defensively when they really need it. So, I don't know that I think Mike Brown's old school that way, and he wants his team to practice, and far be it from me to question Mike Brown's methods. But given that the team talks about, a lack of energy on the defensive end, and the performances have been what they have been on the back end of back-to-backs, I think it's fair to ask the question.
Yeah, Chris, that's a really good point. I didn't even think about that. I'm not sure how much they practice compared to or the numbers of how much each team practices, and they are a younger team, but we're still fairly early in this season. So if you're tired now, you're not going to get any less tired as we go throughout the season. Talking to Chris Biderman, Candlestick Chronicles, and the Sacramento Bee. Chris, a name that was linked to the Sacramento Kings finally got moved from Toronto to the Big Apple. OG Anunoby, what were your thoughts on what the Knicks had to give up and how this affects the Kings in the trade market?
Well, giving up Barrett and Quickly for the Kings made me think that Usai Ujiri, the Raptors general manager, probably would have asked for Keegan Murray and Malik Monk, right? Like that's sort of just what it felt like, what the equivalent offer would be if the Kings were to make it. And that's pretty steep, right? Like Keegan Murray is a centerpiece here. It's been reported and that, Keegan's not going to go anywhere. He's not going to be part of any trade discussions. The Kings really value him, and you do have him salary controlled for the next couple of years. And it's not, they view Keegan as a potential all-star type guy, and they really like the improvement he showed on the defensive side. And Malik Monk is, I think you could make a case a lot of nights Malik Monk is their second or third best player, depending on, how Domantas Sabonis is playing defensively. So, I think it was a steep price, and that sort of exemplifies, I think, the conundrum facing the Kings at the trade deadline is how much are they willing to give up for an upgrade? Because if you're another team and you have somebody, say Toronto is looking at Pascal Siakam in a potential Kings trade, Kevin Huerter and Harrison Barnes, excuse me, I don't know that does a whole lot for them. Like the Kings, maybe outside of a bunch of draft picks on the roster, I don't know that the Kings have too many super enticing assets, maybe aside from Keegan and potentially Malik Monk. And I don't think the Kings have much of an appetite to deal either of those guys. So in terms of the Kings looking at a major upgrade, I don't know that it's going to come because the Kings seem pretty intent on keeping the guys that they have. And maybe they do deal picks. Maybe it's something more like Alex Caruso, somebody who could be had a little bit cheaper and provide a little bit more perimeter defense and still add some outside shooting and maybe do similar to what Chris Duarte did on Sunday, but maybe somebody a little bit more with a little bit better size and a little bit more consistent. I think that would be an interesting name. Malcolm Brogdon, the Kings have been sort of moving around their backup point guard spot between Davion Mitchell and Keon Ellis. You wonder if maybe like a veteran like Brogdon would make sense, something like that. I don't know. Just some names come to mind. But in terms of what Toronto got for OG Anunoby, it makes me think that the price was probably too steep for the Kings. And I think the logic tracks there. But I think that there are plenty of there are ways the Kings roster can improve, but particularly defensively and with size on the perimeter. But I just don't know that the Kings have the assets or have the appetite to move the assets that it would take to get one of those guys.
Interesting. Yeah, talking with Chris Biderman, Candlestick Chronicle. Moving on to the 49ers now, who clinched the 1 seed in the NFC. And I'm going to ask about every other team except for the Niners, actually. Clearly they look like just a different tier from the rest of the NFC. You have the Cowboys and the Lions pretty much playing to a stalemate. And then you have the Eagles slipping completely. I mean, what's your view on the non-Niners teams in the NFC? Is there a team that sticks out to you more than the others, or does it just kind of feel like all three of those teams and maybe even another team that you could include in there are all just kind of, in that second tier, but not really even sniffing the first one?
I think the team, like I don't think the 49ers would lack confidence against the Eagles or Cowboys based on how those games went this season. I know the 49ers do not lack confidence when it would come to, excuse me, potentially hosting Jared Goff, right? Given how well they played against Jared Goff when he was a member of the Rams. But speaking of the Rams, like Matthew Stafford can pose the 49ers some issues, and Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp can be tough covers, and the 49ers are now dealing with injuries to Ambry Thomas and Jair Brown. Their secondary is backed up. Obviously, they're nicked up, I should say. Their safety position as a whole is banged up. So I would say in terms of like a team that might be able to upset the 49ers, I would say I would put Matt Stafford up there and the Rams against anybody. Which adds a little bit more intrigue to this week's game. I know, there aren't any implications for the 49ers, and they're certainly going to rest a lot of their guys. How many, I think, remains to be seen. I think Kyle Shanahan in his conference call with reporters yesterday was a little bit hesitant to just say we're going to rest all of our key guys because, it's not the preseason. You don't have a 90-man roster. You only have 53 guys to choose from and a limited number of guys that you can add from the practice squad. So that'll be interesting to see. But that aside, like, I think Matt Stafford and the Rams can potentially pose the 49ers some issues in the playoffs just because of how much they can score and how much, Sean McVay is familiar with Kyle Shanahan. And we've seen, obviously, the Rams beat the 49ers in the playoffs a couple of years ago in the NFC title game. So not to say the 49ers wouldn't be heavy favorites. I would absolutely expect the 49ers to get to the Super Bowl, knock on wood, as long as everybody stays healthy, of course. But if there were a team that I might, the Eagles defense just isn't there for me. I think the Niners feel like they have the Cowboys numbers, and rightfully so, given the way the last few years have gone. The Lions certainly not. And I think, if it had to come down to an NFC team, maybe under the radar in terms of upset potential with the Niners, I think it's the Rams.
Chris Biderman, Candlestick Chronicles in the Sacramento Bee. Thank you, Chris, for this first appearance of 2024. We will talk to you soon, and thanks for keeping us up to date on the Kings and Niners.
I appreciate you guys. Happy New Year.